Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Haley with Haley Stitches, and today I'm going to show you how to make a super easy layer cake quilt with just one layer cake and some background fabric. This is a completely free quilt pattern, and if you want to get the pattern delivered to your inbox, you can sign up using the link in the description below. Let's get started. For this project, you'll need 2 yards of background fabric and 1 layer cake. You'll also need coordinating thread. My favorite thread color is called Dove and the brand is Orfil. I almost always use gray because I find that it blends into almost every color perfectly. We're also going to need pins, your rotary cutter, and your rotary mat. For rulers, I'm going to use 2 different sizes, but all you really need is your long 6 by 24 inch quilting ruler. I'm also going to use a smaller square ruler to help me cut some of the smaller pieces that we need to make our blocks, but it's not necessary. As always, everything that you need to make today's quilt is going to be linked in the description below. First, I'm going to start cutting my background fabric. So to do that, I'm going to line up the edges of my fabric selvage to selvage. And a selvage is just that textured edge of the fabric to keep it from unraveling. After I do that, I'm going to lay my fabric out on my cutting mat and smooth it all out so I have a nice flat fabric to work with and to start cutting. Before I start cutting, I need to get a nice 90-degree angle on the edge. So to do that, I'm going to just cut a tiny sliver off of the edge, and I'm lining up my ruler with the lines on my mat to make sure it's a nice 90-degree angle. And this will just help keep things more accurate as we keep cutting. For the background fabric, we'll be cutting 24 3-inch strips. So I am actually going to cut one larger 6-inch strip because my ruler is 6 inches wide, and then go back and cut it in half. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I find it to be just a little bit more accurate. You can definitely cut your fabric however you want to if you want to do 3-inch strips the whole way, but it's just easier for me to use that edge of the ruler as a guideline instead of trying to find that 3-inch mark every single time. It just speeds up the process for me personally. So I know that might look a little bit weird if you're not used to seeing that, but that's my thought process behind why I do it. And I'm just going to keep cutting at these 3-inch strips all the way down till I need to readjust my fabric. And then when I need to readjust my fabric again, I'm just going to cut that 90-degree angle on the edge so I have a nice straight edge to work with. And I'm going to keep continuing to cut all of these 3-inch strips that we need for this quilt. And if only cutting was actually this fast, that would be so great. I've been considering purchasing the Stripology ruler to help me cut these strips faster, but I haven't bought one yet. If you have one, let me know in the comments how you like it. And if you don't know, a Stripology ruler is a specialty ruler that has slots in it to help you cut strips faster. And this would be a good quilt for that. Now that all the strips are cut, it's time to sub-cut the strips into smaller rectangles. So I'm going to leave this fabric folded over in half to help me cut a little bit faster and trim off the selvage edge of the fabric. The pattern calls for us to sub-cut these strips into 62 10-inch rectangles. So to get that 10-inch measurement, I'm going to rotate my ruler and set it on its side. Each strip will give us 4 3-inch by 10-inch rectangles, so we do have quite a bit of cutting to do here, but I'll show you a faster way to cut in a moment. Just know that the pattern calls for exactly 2 yards of background fabric, and there's not a whole lot left over if you make any mistakes, so consider purchasing maybe an extra 1/4 yard if you anticipate some cutting errors. So if you want a faster way to cut, all you have to do is just stack the strips on top of each other. So here I'm stacking 4 strips and it makes it go quite a bit faster. And with needing 62 of these, it can take a while if you're just doing one at a time. Another method is to do several stacks right next to each other, and you can take an assembly method approach to make it go faster. And then you don't have to worry about stacking too many on top of each other and not being able to cut through them. After the 62 10-inch rectangles are cut, it's time to cut 62 more rectangles. So this time they're going to be 5-inch rectangles. I'm using the stacking method again to make this go fast, and I'm going to use a small square ruler to get the 5-inch measurements. After all the 3-inch strips are cut, you should have 62 10-inch rectangles and 62 5-inch rectangles. Now that the background fabric is cut, it's time to dig into our layer cake. We're going to need a total of 40 of these squares. 32 of them are going to stay whole and we're not going to cut them. 8 of them we're actually going to cut into smaller squares. So I'm going through and seeing which fabrics I think are going to look best cut up. And some of these have small prints and some have big prints. So let me show you an example of what I'm thinking here. I'm thinking that this fabric is going to look pretty decent cut up because it has smaller pieces. So you're not going to lose the design too much, but a fabric like this maybe would look better whole because the flowers are quite big. And these are the fabrics I ended up choosing to cut. So to cut this layer cake into fours, I'm using the 5-inch line on my ruler to cut the layer cake in half. And then we just need to make one more cut. So I'm actually going to stack everything on top of each other and rotate it. So I can do the exact same thing, make another vertical cut using that 5-inch line on my ruler. And this will result in a total of 4 5-inch squares from one layer cake. And we'll repeat that same process with the rest of the layer cake squares that we chose to cut up. And I'm just going to stack them all on top of each other to make it go a little bit faster. And we'll cut these into fourths to get a total of 32 5-inch squares, but we actually will only use 31 of them, so you'll have one extra. Now we need to go through the 10-inch squares that we decided not to cut up and remove 2 of them because this pattern only calls for 40 10-inch squares. So I'm going to choose these duplicate prints that are black and white and just set them aside for another project. I won't use them in this quilt pattern. After all this cutting, you'll end up with 31 5-inch squares, 32 10-inch squares, 62 3x10-inch rectangles, and 62 3x5-inch rectangles. Now for the fun part, we get to start piecing our blocks. So we're going to start with a 5-inch square and put 2 3-inch by 5-inch rectangles on either side. Sew them together using a 1/4-inch seam allowance. This is what the block looks like after it's pieced together, and for pressing, we want to press towards the dark fabric, so towards the center of the block. The next step in the block assembly is to attach 2 3-inch by 10-inch rectangles to the top and bottom of the block. And again, you'll want to use a 1/4-inch seam allowance to piece all of these blocks. After the block is pieced, we'll want to press again towards the darker fabric. In this case, it's towards the center of the block. This is what the final piece block will look like. It ends up being a 10-inch square, and you'll end up making a total of 31 of these. I don't have a 10-inch ruler to square these up perfectly, so I'm going to use my 9.5-inch square ruler just to kind of trim off the little wonky bits. And you can use any ruler for this. It just cleans it up a little bit and makes piecing a little bit easier as we assemble the entire quilt. Now it's time to piece together our rows, and we're going to start with row A. For row A, we're going to sew the blocks together in an alternating pattern, starting with the 10-inch layer cake square. It'll be helpful to lay everything out ahead of time so you can make sure all the fabric patterns are where you want them to be. But to make sure that I don't get my rows mixed up, I'm going to do them one at a time and just 2 pieces at a time. So I'm going to put these pieces on top of each other, sew with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, and then I'll take the next fabric and do the same thing, and so on and so on. I find it really easy to get the rows mixed up when I'm piecing, so I like to do it that way just to make it nice and easy. This is what row A looks like after it's pieced. You'll make a total of 5 row A's, and we'll press all row A's to the right. Next, it's time to sew our row B's. So our row B's will be set up in an alternating pattern starting with the pieced block. And again, I'm making it nice and easy on myself by sewing just 2 blocks together at a time. This pattern is great for chain piecing if you're good at that and you can do it in a way that makes sense. But sometimes I just like to go row by row, piece by piece, especially if it's a pattern like this where I have the fabrics laid out in a pattern that I like. And it can be really easy to mix these things up, and that can get super frustrating. This is what the pieced row B will look like. We'll make a total of 4 of these rows, and we're going to press all of our row B's to the left, and this will help our fabric nest. Now it's time to piece our quilt top together, starting with row A on top and row B on bottom. You can see that zigzag pattern start to form. We're going to line up our seams so that they nest, and nesting just means that one seam is pressed one way, the other seam is pressed the other, so they fit together like a puzzle piece almost, and it makes piecing really easy, and it makes those seams line up perfectly so everything's in a straight line and you don't get the blocks all which way when you're piecing together these long rows. And here's where the pins come in nice and handy. So you can pin each of these intersections and it'll make it nice and easy going through your sewing machine. Here's what it looks like when a row A and row B are pieced together, and you'll just continue this pattern all the way down until you have a finished quilt top. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and if you want to grab the free pattern, you can click the link in the description below, enter your email address, and I'll send it directly to your inbox. If you're still watching, I'd love to know which pre-cut you want to see a pattern for next, so let me know in the comments below. I'll see you next time.